Morning, everyone. Excited to be here today and share some of my trials and tribulations with you. Like many of you, I have a bit of experience with trying to grow a high growth organization and company. Um, and many of you may have heard of this analogy of the swimming duck. So, above the surface, the duck is gliding across the water. Below the surface, the duck is kind of paddling furiously to just move forward and stay afloat. And in 2017, this was the perfect analogy for our business. From what people could see on the outside, we were doing great. We were growing at a fast clip. We had just won three Inc. 500 awards from 2013 to 2015. We were a rocket ship. However, things on the inside were a little different. The team was showing a lot of burnout. We had a lot of growing pains, and I was kind of close to a nervous breakdown. And as a services firm, there were we are all about people. So the biggest struggle that we were having with our people, some of them were doing great and they were keeping up with our growth. And as the bar grew, they were clearing that bar. But others were sort of hitting the wall at exactly the wrong time. And most acutely, some of our early best performers, the people that kind of got us there, were in that first group. Well, some people who started off like okay at the company were really excelling. And it was really frustrating for me because, as Jason said, I like kind of frameworks, and I couldn't figure out who was necessarily going to be in which group, and it didn't make sense. And I had spent like months thinking about this problem in terms of our people. And like many epiphanies, mine was in a shower moment. I was wrestling with this kind of problem of like, why are some people again clearing the bar and others running into it? And I started drawing lines kind of on the glass in the steam. And all of a sudden I was like, holy crap, like I think I figured this out. I rushed out and I drew out this kind of chart and it was soaking wet, and I cleaned it up and added some colors over a week. And this has been, some of you may have even seen it. It's been shared by a lot of growth and organizational coaches pretty widely around the world now. And this was the crux of that graph. This concept of capacity versus growth. I like the 2x2 matrix. And on the left is, on the vertical is role and requirements, and on the right is time. And imagine the dotted line is the company growth rate and sort of like what we need at any given time. And we'll just pick a function. We'll go with marketing. So you can imagine like early on, there could be like an associate who's the head of the marketing team. And then eventually we need a marketing manager and a VP and SVP. We might need actually all of those people, but it necessitates either that person kind of moving up to that role or sort of stepping down. So what I realized was when people came into the organization, and if the dotted line was our growth rate and they had no ability to get better, pretty soon they were going to be underperformers pretty quickly because they couldn't keep up with the growth. Conversely, there were a few people that were just getting like better faster than we even needed and growing faster. And those are unicorns. And you get a couple of those in your lifestyle of an organization. And I would say, throw a lot of cash and equity at them and don't let them go. The A player, I've adapted Jim Collins' definition of that, which is right person, right place, right time. So the A player is able to grow to, from manager to senior manager, director as soon as you needed those roles. They're kind of perfectly rising on the growth curve. Now, the bulk of people probably don't fall into any of those categories. They fall into this capacity building zone, which I also labeled hard choices, because you might have a company or you might have a division that's growing at 30 or 40% a year, and someone on the team's getting 20 to 30% better. And that's great, but it's still a little bit below the line. And we'll talk about where that leads to hard choices. So the epiphany there was about, hey, it's about the capacity that people have. And if I thought about it kind of in a different way in terms of visually, we had certain needs and the needs were growing and people had certain capacity to give. And the really exciting thing was, how could we help them grow their capacity to meet our needs rather than having to change out those balloons and constantly bring in different people? And this led us to this concept called capacity building. And you can see the longer definition here. But what we realized is we just needed to work on helping people grow their capacity holistically so they could ride that growth curve with us. We went all in on this concept, and it has four interrelated parts that we'll walk through: spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical. Sorry, physical and emotional, and they kind of go in that order for a reason. And what I found is sort of the ultimate win-win, because if we're helping people to get better, this is how you get better. How get better at work. They're also becoming better husbands and wives and partners and parents and children and otherwise. It's hard to really improve holistically in one area and not have impact all your life. So the concept sounds great. I know a lot of people always ask, well, does it work? And since we went all in on this, we were able to grow the company almost 700% from 55 to 330 employees. And we won a lot of awards along the way. In fact, we were a fully remote organization. And when we were awarded the America's Best Small Giants award in 2018, they kind of didn't understand how they did this, because our award started with, and apparently Acceleration Partners is a really great place to work even though they don't have one. So they were pretty kind of incredulous of this culture. This was before COVID, and where remote work was not as prevalent as it was today. So today, I really want to share this playbook of how to use capacity building to ensure that you're building your organizations to hopefully have as many A players as possible, and also to create a culture and a work environment that gives you the best chance of keeping people, near that line, near the dotted line. And I really believe deeply that this is a new playbook for growing businesses after a decade of growing businesses the wrong way and just kind of growth for growth's sake that's burning out all the people along the way. In fact, today, when a lot of people say, hey, we're going to grow 40%, people are, oh, God, please, no, like I'm tired, because they're used to this being not about them growing, but about the organization and growing and them kind of having to try to keep up. So a couple ground rules to remember before we get into the framework. The first is that capacity building starts with you. This is more of a show than a tell exercise in terms of, I think people will react to seeing you demonstrate these things and grow your own capacity than you telling them they need to do that. And then the second premise is that we're the same person as work at work as we are outside of it. Someone who comes to work exhausted with poor prioritization, crappy time management, like they're just not going to have those things at home. It's not like they're great at home. They walk into work, they don't have them. And that's why this concept, again, if you raise your game in one sphere, I think the opposite will grow as well. And this is true even more today than a few years ago, with people working hybrid and from home. They're literally like the same person, right? Before they turn on the screen or off the screen. You don't even get this chance to like put on your work persona and not work persona. You're often working from home. And again, I think as we dive into this, you'll see that it's more than being about the business. I really think it is kind of the ultimate win-win. So let's dive in with the first thing: spiritual capacity. Teams with spiritual capacity have the clarity on their values and strengths and are aligned to those on a daily basis. It's not, most importantly, spiritual capacity is not religious. But I really think that it is impossible to be a great leader if you don't know who you are and what you value. My friend Gary Ridge, who is the CEO of WD-40, he took over that company and grew it 10x, the little oil can, and he totally changed their culture around. And he used to say that a person at his company who made a decision under one or more of their core values was safe. And I always thought that was really interesting. One, first of all, how much he believed in the company's core values as a decision-making tool. But I thought about that from a personal perspective. And like, if we don't know our personal core values, how are we safe? Particularly when we're making some really big and important decisions. And I think a lot of leaders start out by building their leadership style around one of two directions. And I know this was true for me. I call it the patchwork quilt. So they emulate the things from leaders they really like, or they do the absolute opposite thing from leaders that they didn't like and bosses that they hated. And what both of those tactics have in common is that they're really about other people's styles and values, not your own. It is very much a patchwork quilt approach. And I realized very early on in my career as I was doing that it just didn't feel right. It didn't do authentic. I was at a conference. We had an issue with some employees. I asked another person how they dealt with it. I adapted his style, and it just wasn't me, and it felt terrible. It was not authentic. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a different way to do it. And that guy was a terrible leader. So why was I sort of taking his style? A lot of companies have leadership standards, right? Your company may have something like this. This was a company I spoke to earlier this year, and they said, "Hey, here are the things we have for our leaders." Now, this is how you expect leaders to act and behave in your company, and that's fine. But you can't tell someone the type of leader you need them to be. That's very personal, and it's not cookie cutter. And I think one of the best kind of historical examples of this is Jim Collins' concept of sort of five levels of leadership, from moving from a capable individual to a contributing team member to a competent manager to an effective leader. And then this pinnacle, which is sort of a level five leader, someone who is transcendent. And interestingly, if you double click on what are some of the qualities of those transcendent leaders, it's a personal sense of humility, a deep personal understanding of one's strengths and weaknesses, and a laser-like focus on the organizational purpose. And this has to come from a place of self-awareness and authenticity. Like this has to come from being the best version of you, not trying to be some template that has been put out there. And I have always found that core values and personal core values, not company core values, are the foundation of authentic leadership. Although there's usually some alignment, right? You're trying to find an organization where your personal core values align with the company core values. I went down this process years ago. It was the most important thing I ever did in my career. Anytime someone reads the achievements or things I've done or otherwise, I found it's interesting. Almost all of them were after I figured out my five core values, because these changed how I make decisions with my time, personally, with my family and my business. It changed how we tie company policies to these values. And it was definitely the single biggest change in my life in terms of what's the decision making rubric for the type of leader that I want to be and how I want to lead in all aspects of my life. And I believe in this so deeply that, when we take our up and coming managers off site, we spend time helping them figure out their why and their personal core values. And after they do this and figure these things out, they're able to go back to their teams and better communicate what was important to them and understand some of the things that they had been doing for a while, but they didn't understand why. So, for example, several times we found that a leader on the team has a core value of trust. And usually they have a core value of trust because there was some violation of trust when they were younger or in their childhood, and it's fundamental to them. The way they manage is you're kind of in the trust circle or not in the trust circle. Because we asked them that. What happens when someone's late for a meeting, doesn't show up, can't be found in the afternoon? They're like, oh, they're kind of in the penalty box and I threw out the key and they're not getting out. And we said, do they know that? And they said no. So again, in that case, that leader was able to go back to the team and say, hey, I am someone who really values trust. Trust is important to me. Here's how you can earn trust with me as a leader, and here's how trust gets broken, and totally change the relationship they have with their team. Some examples of core values. There's a rubric I'll kind of share later, and is shared in my course around what makes a good core value and not. One word doesn't really work, but these are some that people on our team came up with. Do whatever it takes, mental and physical discipline, always be learning and growing, and include all perspectives. I would intuitively know the types of projects to give to people based on their values. I'm not going to give on the include all perspectives person. Go run with this and just do it yourself and make it fast and make it dirty. That is just not how they operate. And when start to know people to that level, you can just use them to their strength. So if you're interested in diving into this core value and I can provide these questions in a follow up, but there's some questions that you would ask yourself. And those questions are here, and the common themes to your responses, and it's more of a deeper exercise, but it would start to kind of illuminate the foundation of your core values and help you really understand what are you doing in these situations, what is consistent about the things that feel really right and they fit like a glove, and they feel really, really, really wrong. Another powerful spiritual capacity tool, and which overlines with the core values in my experience, is this concept of why. This core purpose or motivation that drives you both inside and outside of work. And for a lot of people, their why is their kind of dominant core value. And Simon Sinek wrote this great best-selling book, Start with Why. I think he convinced a lot of people why would be really great. But turns out it's really hard to just go figure out your why. It's not something easily done because there was one person particularly who sat down with Simon Sinek, and his name was Gary Sanchez, and he figured out his why. And he was like, "Look, this isn't scalable. I had to spend time with you." Gary started helping a lot of other people figure out their whys, and eventually, after thousands of interviews, he realized there was sort of a taxonomy, and that there were 9 core whys. And this is again one of these things that we have done in our organization. And when I know someone's why, I can tell why they're in a difficult discussion, why they're frustrated, why we gave them the wrong project. Again, it just ties to who they are at their core. I was on a call yesterday, and someone kept saying, "That makes sense. That makes sense." I was like, "You are definitely a make sense of complexity person, even though you don't know it." And I sent her the description. She said, "Oh my God, this like describes me to a T." There's some other things out there, assessments out there. I know people call them, psychological tests or profiles. I don't think it's about putting everyone in a box. It's about understanding your strengths and understanding your weaknesses. And these assessments kind of they start to be consistent after a while about the environments that you work well in, the environments you don't work well in, the tasks that work well. Great performers know how to play to their strengths, and they also know their limitations. I just want to stress these are not for hiring. I think they give you a vocabulary for your team and yourself and understand, explain things, but there's no right or wrong or good or bad. In fact, I think a great team is made up of different people with different strengths and weaknesses. But they really help with if you understand someone else's strengths, their why, their Discord, maybe their Colby. It just really helps with communications. We come to the table with different orientations, different styles, and the more you recognize that about yourself and others, the more it impacts your leadership style. So once we know what we want, spiritual capacity, we can get much more disciplined, focused, and efficient in going after it. I think an organization with a high level, to me, this is the operating system. An organization with a high level of intellectual capacity is a culture that's focused on learning and improvement and planning and discipline and feedback. Like we're going to go do what we want. Now we figured out what we want to do, and we want to do it as well as we can. And there's an interesting chart. A lot of you are familiar with the S curve of adoption in technology. My friend Whitney Johnson really, I think, astutely adapted this to learning. And you have people on your team and your organizations now. Look, there's a lot of frustration when you're in the growth stage. There's frustration and learning and struggle go hand in hand. So when people are on the growth stage on a curve, they're actually learning a lot. The thing you actually have to be careful for is when they've mastered it. When they've gotten to a top of the curve, most people need to jump to another curve or they get bored. People leave when they stop your organization, when they stop learning. And I think when they get people on our teams get to the top of this curve, we forget to challenge them and we let them coast. And that's actually when they're most vulnerable. Look, it's important to just create a culture of learning, pushing your employees to learn. That could be a book club, a podcast club, tuition reimbursement. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do. I like the sort of podcast club because it's free and people can do it on their own time, and it might be an hour. We've picked some topics like Web3 or otherwise or AI. We've picked a couple kind of key podcasts and we've said, hey, listen to this and let's come to the table and discuss and let's brainstorm. The other thing that's really interesting is I think you need to teach people about leadership and management before they're there, right? You learn about driving in the classroom, but before you get in the car, a lot of people aren't meant to lead and don't like to lead. Unfortunately, the organization sort of makes that the only way to kind of to elevate. And then, well, that's a much deeper discussion. We do management group, we do learning groups, and we try to do things with managers before they become managers to make sure they want to be it. And like anything, I think behavior is really important. You need to incentivize learning. You need to reimburse it, and you need to make sure that the company is people are clear that the company's serious about them just learning overall. It's one of those holistic things. And you might say, well, what do I, keep it to, or does it have to just be related to what they're doing? And I would say absolutely not. I think learning begets learning. let people learn about what they're passionate about. They'll figure out how to bring it to work. Like we had someone who's really passionate about learning a new language, and we're a global organization. We cover 20 countries, and there's probably a really interesting role for them to use those language skills. David Epstein, the founder of the best-selling author of the best-selling book Range, sort of really pointed out in his book that actually like learning different things and different approaches, it's sort of that Medici effect of when you bring it together, it actually as people become better critical thinkers because they're bringing new insights from outside the discipline. And look, to me, the essential component of a learning culture is a culture that does feedback well. Feedback is a critical component of learning. And with that said, I think most companies do feedback horribly. And one of the reasons they do feedback horribly is they don't train people on giving feedback, receiving feedback. They kind of don't have rules about what good feedback looks like. And so they fall into the most common traps. And what are those traps? Well, first of all, I like the rule, the 72-hour rule. You should give feedback within 72 hours, or you should be forced to let it go forever. And the reason is if feedback is about the person getting better or correcting a mistake, then you want to do it when it's fresh. You want to sort of address it. I want to say, Jason, hey, look, I know you were trying to be friendly on that call, but it was way too casual. And so when you have the call tomorrow, no, I really think like you might want to do that a little bit differently. Just an example, Jason. Look, none of us like when you have these check-ins or reviews and 3 and 6 months down the line, and people bring all of their grievances from 3 to 6 months ago. It feels petty. It sounds like targeting. How does this work in your relationship when something goes wrong and then someone starts bringing up all the things you did wrong 3 to 6 months ago? It never works well. But the problem is the dam always bursts. We always go back. So if you make this rule, like I have to give it or I have to let it go, it really improves how feedback is used with your culture. Similarly, one of the core things that people do is they critique character, not actions. And in doing that, they cause a tremendous amount of psychological damage. I have talked to people 5 or 10 years later who still are sort of traumatized by something that they were told they were or that they weren't. This is a terrible strategy for leadership. It's a terrible strategy for parenting. You don't ever critique someone's character, right? So here's an example. A lot of times, you might have someone on your team and you struggle with their strategic ability. If I tell someone, hey, you're not strategic, that doesn't sound like something that they can fix. It just sounds like something that they are. If you said, hey, your work needs to be more strategic and give some examples of what they had done, that totally changes the equation. Similar, you might get frustrated and say, hey, you're lazy. Again, what can I do about that? Versus focusing on the behavior. Seems like we didn't have your full attention. Let's talk about what to do differently next time. And I once heard a social psychologist say you should never tell your kids, again, a parenting rule, that they are smart or not smart. That either makes them think that they're stupid or that they have impunity to do anything because they're smart. Again, you would talk about, hey, that action that you took was smart. A person can take actions that are smart and they can take actions that are not smart. And again, most people really are good at something they haven't done before. And nowhere is this more true with difficult conversations. So we built a program, I like to say, for those of you who've seen, Law and Order, we call it Rip from the Headlines, where we take very common feedback conversations that don't go well. And we invite a group of managers and we give each of them a script on one of the cards. And we have them sit down and do it in front of another group of 20 people. And suddenly you see why these conversations are problematic. This script is one of our most favorite ones. It's the 30-day check-in, and the employee thinks it's going great and is asking about a promotion, and the manager thinks it's not going to work out, and they need to let them know. And you watch this conversation for a fair amount of time, and it's just really awkward. And the manager can't get it out, and you can see why the employee walks away, and they're really confused because the manager tried the bleep sandwich, compliment, then the thing they want to talk about and compliment, and the employee is totally confused. So what we have them do is we run through it. Everyone gives feedback to the people that are speaking. They run it again. They're direct, they're more straightforward, and the tenor of the conversation totally changes. And what's amazing is this was a pretend conversation, and people couldn't have it. The thing that we do in business just worse than every other industry, sports and arts and theater and otherwise and music is that we do things in the game that we didn't practice for. Most of those other industries, they would practice over and over again before they would do something live. And a difficult feedback conversation, if you've never given one, is one where you definitely need to learn that. So again, back to this holistic comment, you might have these discipline and routine matters, and personal discipline feeds work discipline, and we might not feel like talking about these things. Like, what does a good morning routine look like? What does good sort of ordering your list look like? But I can promise you that both of these people work in your organization. So, Emily wakes up early, she meditates, showers, eats breakfast. Frank wakes up at 7, snoozes, and then starts scrolling through emails in bed. Emily makes a top 3 list of things she needs to do for the day, sets a time for each. Frank just dives into his inbox for hours, responding to unimportant messages. By noon, Emily's got her top 3 done, feels productive, ready to go on calls in the afternoon. Frank realizes he hasn't eaten, he's grumpy, and he hasn't gotten anything important done. So both of these people are at your organization. And again, you might not think it's part of your purview, but these are the types of behaviors and otherwise that carry inside of work and outside of work. So talking about them, modeling them, having people see how they make a difference in their life and their work is really important. So physical capacity. Teams with high physical capacity ensure that their employees get strong results without burning out. The key tenets here are this concept of work-life integration, boundaries, and outcomes. I'd ask you, and can't raise your hands because I can't see them, but how many people here on your team who think that if they have someone on their team, they let their physical health suffer and deteriorate, that they are just going to show up to work bouncing and full of energy? I've never seen it before, and this is the opportunity, right? Organization has the opportunity to help people have the space to improve their physical capacity. And the stats on this are pretty dim. A WHO study actually found that people working more than 55 hours a week had a 35% higher risk of stroke. They had a 17% higher risk of heart disease, and they attributed almost $750,000 deaths to sort of overwork in the last study in 2016. And I guess what I have learned is that you can overwork, you can kind of do marathon hours, but at some point, the longer that goes on, it will crash. And some of you might remember the story of Marissa Mayer. Marissa came to Google in 2012. Sorry, she came to Yahoo as the new CEO of Google. She was a rock star at Google. She had run some of their biggest products and groups, I think Mail and maybe parts of Search or otherwise. And when people started talking about her, they started kind of in these interviews, the stuff she talked about, she was valorizing these 100-hour work weeks, 130-hour work week is the key to her success. And I thought it was pretty interesting when someone double clicked and asked her, how do you do a 103-hour work week? Because if you do the math, there's not even enough hours in a 5-day work week. She said you have to be really strategic when you sleep, when you shower, and how you go to the bathroom. Now, during Marissa Mayer's 5-year tenure, she acquired 53 companies for over $2 billion that were all ostensibly worthless. Over a third of the company quit in 2015, and in 2016, only 34% expected anything to improve. She also lost her bonus the last 2 years for overlooking a security breach that was really important. And look, there's no one can doubt that Marissa Mayer had an amazing work ethic. But there really was no positive outcome for the business other than the $100 million tenure she got. She created this culture of workaholicism, and it wasn't about results. It wasn't about working on the right things, and it actually didn't produce any outcome other than probably destroying many people's mental health and physical capacity. So look, the first rule of leadership and management is similar to is similar to medicine. Don't do any harm. Like, don't diminish the physical capacity of your employees. And in fact, if you can help improve the physical capacity of your employees, you will probably get higher performance. And we just need to, I think we've changed a little bit. This was a little bit 10 years ago of just evangelizing these 100-hour work weeks and the nonstop. You have to evangelize working smart, not working hard. In fact, that's part of my onboarding speech of our company. Like, I'm sorry, we don't reward working hard. We reward working smart. I like the comment. Yeah, she was probably too tired to focus on things that doesn't matter. I actually think she was one of these people who genetically doesn't need a lot of sleep, but she forced everyone else into that mentality as well. So here's the other problem with just a culture of working hard. The math doesn't work. It's very hard to overcome the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule. So if I looked at any of your organizations, I would see these things to be true. 80% of your customers come from 20% of your efforts. 80% of your sales are probably from 20% of your clients. And if you want to see this personally, you wear probably 20% of your clothes 80% of the time if you looked in your closet. So this is the opportunity to help people get results without killing themselves. The 80% of what they're doing isn't mattering. It isn't getting the outcome. It's sort of the signal versus noise. And part of the problem is we've gotten used to managing inputs, not outcomes, and we need to switch this over. We actually understand this in sales more than anything. If I said to you, "Hey, would you like the sales person who made 100 calls this week and sold $1,000, or do you like the person who made 10 calls and sold $10,000?" You take the latter person every day and twice on Sunday. Again, we're good in the outcome metrics in sales. We're bad in the other things. Marissa Meyer was an input focused leader. Most leaders and managers focus on the wrong things. Don't focus on the hours. Figure out the outcomes. If you're in marketing, what is the outcome you're seeking? If you're in client services, what is the outcome that you're seeking? And orient work around the outcome so that you're rewarding people that are getting the outcomes, not the ones who are sitting in the chair, making themselves seen, burning the midnight oil, but focusing on those 80% of the things that only get 20% of the outcomes. And look, people need buffers between work and life. They're kind of desperate for boundaries, especially with hybrid and remote work. You don't want people, look, there are times when you got to work late and do a big proposal and otherwise, but you want those to be the exceptions and not the rule. You want the people on your team to have real rest, real vacation. No one watching this webinar wants work to be their entire life. Work might be important, but there's other stuff out there. So there's a few tactics to do this. One of my favorite I took on a few years ago was this simple concept of delayed delivery. So when I send an email outside of normal hours that's not critical, I used to realize I would go through my email on Saturday mornings, I would clean it out, and I would get all these responses back because people that were on the team or subordinate to the CEO of the company feel that they should respond, and that's not what I wanted. So I started just using delayed delivery. And if I send something out of hours and it's not urgent, I just put it to the next day. It lets that person wake up, not have that anxiety, not see it before bed. Also, if you do this all weekend, you can look like a hero at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday when you're still asleep. And look, you have to model the behavior. Leadership is like parenting. Do as I say, not as I do doesn't work. So if I'm going on vacation and I say, "Hey, I'm going on vacation, team, but here's the way you can reach me. You can reach me on my cell or email, or I'll be online and all this stuff." What am I telling my team? I'm telling my team that it's not really a vacation. It's a sort of change of a venue, right? And they're going to do the same thing because I'm modeling that behavior. It's very different if I say, "Hey, I'm going on vacation and it's a really important time with my family. And actually, here's my wife's cell phone, and text her if it's an emergency and you really need to get me. Otherwise, I'm going to be offline enjoying time with my family, and I'll see you on Monday." And one of my favorite things that I've seen a CEO do was sort of an example of this. He wrote a similar out of office to this, again, saying like, "Look, like I'm taking a vacation," and setting that example. And then he said at the bottom, if your email is really urgent while I'm out, please resend it to interruptyourvacation@firstaround.com, and I'll respond to it promptly. So obviously, this is someone who is setting, the expectation for what a real crisis is when you're on vacation, and what is not. And I'm sure that their team feels very different about taking vacations. The other really simple thing that you can do is just set clear deadlines. If your employees don't know when something is due, they tend to operate on a LIFO basis. It's an accounting term, last in, first out. You ask them to do something and they assume that the last thing is the most important. I'm constantly asking the people that work for me or my EA or otherwise to kind of give me the list that I gave them, and I will help them reprioritize it. And don't assume just because I said something, it's more important than the thing that we talked about last week. So we need to be clear with our teams that not everything is urgent and important. And that also solves a lot of problem of people racing around just working on the most recent thing and not the thing that's most important. Teams with so this brings us to our last capacity, emotional capacity. And teams with high emotional capacity have high psychological safety. They communicate well, and they take ownership of their outcomes. Main areas of focus here, I always say, are locus of control, communication styles, and comfort zones. So a lot of us have heard this term psychological safety at work. I think it's integral to great work, and part of emotional capacity. If people can't be honest or vulnerable or get uncomfortable, then you're just not going to hear all the perspectives. They also need to be able to speak kind of truth to power. So a lot of times you hear this term, but like I don't think people define it. So for me, it's kind of simple. If I have this one-to-one trust with someone, then psychological safety is this exists on a one-to-many basis when you walk into the team. When you walk into the team on the first day, you realize it's okay to say, "Hey, Bob, like I think that's a bad idea." In the meeting, or "Hey, Jason, I think that's a bad idea," and know that Jason goes, "You know what? Thanks for bringing that up." You go, "Oh, okay. This is a safe environment for me to do that." And a psychologically safe environment is just the critical foundation of emotional capacity. Look, we also have to get outside of our comfort zones and practice discomfort. I think a lot of times we often conflate things that are uncomfortable and unsafe. They aren't the same. In fact, I think there's still a little residual hangover from COVID from this and some anxiety. There were things during COVID that were not comfortable and not safe, but once they became safe, it was uncomfortable for people to do it. We actually had an offsite. We were doing it at a camp. We were having people sleep in these luxury bunks, and we got a lot of feedback that not about COVID, but people just nervous. They didn't want to sleep with people they didn't know or otherwise. And we had sort of a frank discussion that like, hey, people haven't seen each other in 3 years. This is part of the experience and the late night conversations and the campfire. And this is not something this is something that you can do. And this was the same time when the war in Ukraine started, and basically, people in Poland were letting everyone live in their houses and go to school together. And it just felt it felt a little misplaced, and we pushed people, and actually the feedback at the end was like 9.5 out of 10, and some of the things that they were most worried about was what were the things that they enjoyed the most, like having time to talk to people and connect with them. So sometimes you have to push. And look, there's some lighter ways I think to do this, in terms of getting people out of their comfort zones. Like mix them up at company events. Encourage personal sharing among peers and teams. When we start a lot of our meetings, there's what's your high and low for the week, or a personal win, or a personal low, or a professional win, or professional low. We've started off quarterly meetings with, hey, what did you really mess up this quarter? Like just getting people comfortable kind of talking about these things. Also, bringing in speakers who demonstrate vulnerability and different perspectives. We've had some speakers that kind of had everyone in tears after they talked about sharing their story, and it just opened the door to conversation and connection. And again, plan some activities that challenge your people. I know the cliche trust fall, but these sort of activities are the things like if it doesn't kill you, it kind of makes you stronger. I think that adage is appropriate. Look, and last but not least, don't forget about the relationship. I think oftentimes in a customer interaction or otherwise, we just jump into it. We jump into the transaction, how's it going, or the pitch or otherwise. Take time to personally connect. A super valuable little thing you can do all the time is like, hey, like how's it going? Like how are things going? Meaning that generally. And sometimes people say, you know what, thanks for asking. Like it's actually been a really bad week. And that's what they want to talk about for 20 minutes. And now you actually get into that discussion rather than being like, why are they so distracted when I'm presenting them these numbers? Do they not like it? Are they not happy? We did, really well. So organizations with high capacity are super accountable. They look inward and not outward. I was once at a conference, and a partner I was told by someone that one of the companies we partner with said that we were taking kickbacks from another competitor, and they knew this for a fact. And so what had happened was this other competitor had come in of theirs. We're a services firm. We work with different software providers. This other software company had come in, and they had built an agency team, and they had met with us 5 or 6 times, and they asked us what features our clients wanted. And we were engaging with them a lot. And the other firm was competing against us and didn't have a good message, and the product wasn't updating. And so we just were doing more work with this other firm. Now we had given firm A the feedback about all the things they needed to do better, But somehow someone found it easier in the organization to invent this narrative that was not true, that we were taking kickbacks from the other firm, and that's why we were working with them. And I've seen this versions of this all over the place. I see this with a lot of sales teams. There's a lot of sales teams or teams, they never lost a deal that was their fault. If you are a great leader, you do not let your team talk about exogenous and external factors and why things didn't work out. You focus on the things that you control and not the things that you don't control, and you get your team oriented around that. You just don't let them focus about the things that they don't control. I mean, that's just a hallmark of a high emotional capacity team. So let's talk about, we went through all the elements. I just want to wrap up by talking about how do you build a team of people with high capacity in the first place. So there's three things here. I would say I'll go through them: hire for aptitude, make hard choices, and then make room on the ladder. So, in terms of hiring, as a lot of us have these growing businesses, we're kind of drawn to hiring the high experience person. A lot of times, the problem is that's the yellow line, right? So, you hire someone with experience, but that experience has taken a long time and they're not in growth mode anymore. And so, what happens is you're growing and you eventually overcome that experience. And when they start, when you hire the big company person, they don't want to do a lot of work because they've had a lot of people on their team. And so they're overqualified. And when you're overqualified for a job, you tend to not do well at it. We've had a lot more experience figuring out promoting those high aptitude people. They're a little over their head. And when you're over your head, you want to do a great job and you want to make sure you impress people. And eventually their growth curve keeps growing with the growth line rather than it gets taken over. Now, some roles you need experience. You would always want to have experience plus aptitude. Ideally, it would be a combination. But if you've had a lot of these experience hires that haven't worked out, the reason why is because I think you're not realizing that it took them 15 years to get that experience. And if your company's growing quickly, you'll outgrow that quickly as well. Traits to look for in hiring. I like people that were promoted in place. It's too hard. It's too easy these days to just leave your job and have someone else give you a promotion at a different company as part of going there or a title. I think that you want to see people who were grown in place and recognized by the people that they work with that they were doing a great job. People have a drive to learn. You ask them about something they've studied or got better at, or they're reading, and they just have that sort of get better gene, you can tell. Overperformance on goals. Again, sales leaders are good at interviewing against this, but people will just say, I did this. It's really important to say, how did other people do and what was the goal? And really good sales leaders do this and try to benchmark, was that overperformance, or was that underperformance, or was that meeting performance? And then finally, pull, not push. I might have a bias on this, but I think the best people are constantly pulled to jobs from people that they worked with and leaders that they worked with over time. I like to say, like, if someone's 40 years old and they are working with a recruiter they've never worked with before, and they seem to be trying to get a job with everyone they haven't worked with before, I don't know. That's a real red flag in my book, that they're trying to find people that don't know them rather than leaning into their network, and their network wants to hire them and bring them along. And then again, that last piece is making hard choices. As we talked about before, the thing about this capacity building zone is that not everyone can stay on that line. And you've got to make the decision when you need a director and that manager is not ready for it. And they need to someone needs to come in above them. And they hate it. And they're not good at taking it. But you can't look away for what the job needs. This happens a lot in finance. There's a real difference between a bookkeeper and a controller and a CFO. And I had a friend that had a very loyal bookkeeper, and he needed a CFO, and he knew that she wasn't the CFO, but she was really hurt that he was going to hire a CFO. So he ended up giving her the job, and she made $1 million mistake because she didn't have the international tax experience that job required and that the dotted line required. And was that her fault? No, that was his fault, because it was really hard to sort of say no. But look, that's the job of a leader and manager, to make those hard decisions. And what he should have done was say, look, we need a CFO, and this person is going to be a great mentor for you, and they can train you up in a couple of years. Maybe they'll leave and you'll be ready to be a CFO, or you'll be have a mentor and have the capacity that you need to learn those things and go be a CFO elsewhere. But Again, just because we're trying to build everyone's capacity doesn't mean we don't have those hard choices. So finally, I think there's a great analogy that applies to high growth companies. Imagine NASA, had a mission to send a spacecraft to Mars, and they sent this thing to Mars, and it landed, and everyone's on TV, and we're watching it, and they open it, and either everyone's dead on board that capsule on Mars, or they leave someone behind. No one would consider this a successful mission, right? The people are part of the mission, and what's the point in making it all the way to the moon if you lose your people along the way? I think so many companies do this. They focus too much on the goals. They lose sight of the people, bringing them along on the journey. I think this has been the single biggest problem with growth oriented companies over the last decade. And I showed you this slide before, but I am far more proud of the 30 best places to work awards that we won along the way than I am of whatever those growth numbers were on the right, because we grew our business with getting everyone to the moon and having people grow with the business. And the last thing, as I noted above, as I noted before, is look, you gotta make room. And again, I'm proud of the people that have come on this journey. So one of them, we had some employee, one of our longest tenured employees, came to us via Craigslist for an ad for a copywriter over 10 years ago. When the head of our affiliate group left, which was our biggest group, she raised her hand to take over. We didn't think she had the experience, but she kept leveling up with our business. And today, Sarah is our chief client officer and COO, and has more than 200 people working for her globally. Similarly, early in our history, I needed to hire an administrative assistant. This person came to us with a binder, everything all organized. She met with my number two and I at Panera. We were blown away by her, and we said we have to hire this person. And Emily went on to be our VP of Talent and Culture, and is responsible for most of those Best Places to Work awards that you've seen. And then last but not least, over 15 years ago, when we were just getting started and had a couple of people, the first person I ever hired was an intern named Matt Wool. He was an MBA student. There was no internships during the Great Recession. I hired him. He went and took a job. A few years later, I called him. I asked him to be our VP of Client Services. He was our fourth employee. As I kept growing in my role, he kept pace as my number two. And then finally in 2019, I asked him to take over CEO in a role that he does today. So I think some of us secretly want our team or company to do worse when we leave or aren't there, and that's ego driven. But real leadership is about building capacity. It's about building the bench. A lot of people would say this was a good leader because look, the team falls apart when they leave. But no, that's probably the sign of a weak leader who made too many things about themselves. A great leader would build something so that it gets better after they leave, not worse after they leave. And I think that needs to be the goal of everyone. So I'm excited. I think we made it to the moon with everyone alive and growing. And even now, as I've stepped out of the CEO role and gotten out of the day-to-day business, they're the ones that are creating what's next to the organization. And that's really fun to watch. So just going to leave you with three things. The first is to remember to lead with values. Second is focus on your team on the right outcomes, not the right inputs. And the last and most important is, be a team and be a team leader that builds people. So I know we had some Q&As. We don't have a ton of time. I can try to follow up with people. If you go to robertglazer.com, if you send me a note and you have a question, I'll definitely make sure I follow up with you. I also made the course available. If you're interested in that core value course, we've had over 2,000 people take it, and it actually can be a great exercise for a team to take together and get to know their core values. So thank you all very much. And I think we're open up the Q&A.